Spoštovane dame, cenjeni gospodje, dobrodošli na dogodku Ministrstva za finance, ki nosi naslov Ohranjanje konkurenčnosti in socialne pravičnosti v novi fiskalni realnosti. Vsekakor naslov, to se lahko strinjamo, ki zaobjema številne izzive, s katerimi pa se ta trenutek soočajo praktično vse evropske države, pa tudi širše, čeprav se nam v Sloveniji včasih zdi, da so nekateri izzivi lastni samo nam in da je iskanje ustreznih rešitev težko in dolgotrajno samo za nas. No, da temu ni tako, bodo danes skozi pogovor s finančnim ministrom Klemenom Boštjančičem, ki bo tudi v vlogi gostitelja, lahko pritrdili njegovi evropski kolegi. Z nami bodo delili svoje izkušnje, kako sami naslavljajo prej omenjene izzive. Zdaj jih prosim, da se mi pridružijo na odru. Z nami je hrvaški finančni minister Marko Primorac, pa slovaški finančni minister Ladislav Kamenicki, tudi avstrijski zvezni minister Magnus Brunner, minister Klemen Boštjančič in madžarski državni sekretar Tibor Tot. Welcome. Z nekoliko zamude se nam bo žal pridružil še italijanski finančni minister Giancarlo Giorgetti, a nič zato, mi smo tukaj, tako da predlagam, da začnemo. Welcome everybody. Minister, zdaj pa besedo predajam vam.
Good afternoon and welcome to everyone, and a special welcome to my dear colleagues to be able to come to Ljubljana to discuss the very important challenges that lay ahead, I dare to say, all of us. Let me start by borrowing the statement from one of the recent articles from Financial Times, written by Chris Gill, with the title, Beware Fiscal Fairy Tales. It's an article which I really liked, and I think it's a good starting point. So it says that on the center of political spectrum, the greatest illusion is that there is a way to persuade the public that higher taxes and more public investment is needed, and all this is in our collective interest. On the political left, the most pervasive fiction is that all the necessary funds can be raised from the rich, with next to zero consequences for the rest of population. And on the political right, the long-standing fairy tale of choice is that tax cuts raise revenues. So the conclusion in the article goes, fairy tales are comforting because the lead characters usually possesses a special power and something magical turns up, enabling everyone to live happily ever after. Across Europe, many governments are running their budgets in such fantasy worlds, also US. You do not need a particularly frugal view on public finance to know that it is unlikely to end very well. This article is in short addressing all what we should and will talk about in the next 2 hours. Many of actually EU, government finances are on unsustainable levels. Past year, general government deficit exceeded Maastricht criterion in 12 member states, and 13 member states exceeded debt threshold. According to the Commission Autumn Forecast 2023, deficit criterion will not be met by 12 member states in 2024 and by 13 member states in 2025, whereas public debt to GDP is expected to be higher than 60% in 15 member states in 2024 and 16 member states in 2025. Future economic growth in rapidly aging European society is estimated to decline unless productivity is to be increased, which will require sizable investment spending or major and, of course, less popular reforms occur. Governments will each need to find the correct balance that will address their public finance sustainability issues and at the same time focus their investments into areas which will increase potential growth not only in the short term, but also in medium to long term. The good news is that the necessary consolidation of budgets is far from impossible, so long as we don't start falling for new fiscal fantasies. So, after this opening statement, I hope it is somehow easier to understand why during ECOFIN meetings, which we have every month, ministers often joke that being a Minister of Finance in Europe today is one of the loneliest jobs. And on the other hand, we sometimes see those meetings as group therapy meetings. And now, dear colleagues, straight to the point. Before this conference, we sent you the comparison between EU and Slovenia regarding the total general government revenues, which shows that in 2022 they amounted to 44% of GDP in Slovenia, which is below both the euro area and EU. This result was the same as in pre-crisis year of 2019 for Slovenia, while the total taxation was somehow lower in 2019 for both EA and EU. Slovenia ranks high in the level of social contributions. On the other hand, we are well below EU average and EA average regarding direct tax collection. So, my first question goes to all of you, starting with you, Magnus, and that is, how can you comment your social model with increasing cost of aging and taxation in comparison with above statistics? What could be the most effective system for funding the pension and healthcare systems in member states?
Well, first of all, let me start with saying thank you for inviting us here to this beautiful place. As you mentioned before, from time to time we are in therapy meetings in Brussels once a month. And it's a beautiful place to be here, better than in Brussels sometimes, to be honest. I heard that this place actually used to be a prison in former times when it belonged to Austria. I hope you won't lock me up being an Austrian after a certain time of a period. No, but coming back, I think to your question, I think there are areas where the European Union and us as member states have done quite a lot. We've done a lot of about responding to the economic crisis after the COVID time. We've done a lot about also reforms on the economic governance review, the fiscal reform. So I think a lot has happened. But of course, pension systems, as you mentioned, and healthcare systems, that's quite a challenge still, I would say, for maybe all of us. What did we do in Austria altogether? Focusing on the pension system, of course, that's one of the main challenges we have. The pension system is not in danger, I would say, but a lot to do, a lot of things to do. I think we have to focus on using the taxpayers' money, and it is taxpayers' money, as effective as possible. That's probably the main focus we should have. There are three pillars, of course, in Austria. I believe everywhere else as well. The sort of public pillar. We have quite a big gap in Austria between the factual retirement age and the legal retirement age. The gap is at about 3 years. 65 is the actual legal retirement age, and we are at about 62 at the moment, which is quite expensive at the end of the day. We've got studies which show us that 1 month retiring a bit later would bring us 200 million euros. That's quite something, actually. That's where we should focus on. And what we're talking about in Austria is linking the start of retirement with life expectations. I don't know whether you have that. That's sort of a very innovative thing. Quite interested in what you think about that. That's the first thing, and then we should sort of make it more popular, tax-wise more popular, to work longer, of course. And that's what we did in the last months or so. We have some some tax incentives for people who want to work longer, and for people who want to come back from their retirement into the working system. So some reforms we have already focused on, and of course in the second and third pillar we've got some challenges as well. I think we should use the capital market more intensively to support that. The capital market union will play quite an important role on that. I think we need to get incentives for using the private savings for pensions. And I've just recently had one sort of suggestion with a saving account where you have no capital gains tax anymore after a certain time. Hello, Georgette. Mr. Giancarlo, hello. So these are some of the reforms. Some of the reforms we implemented on the retirement side, and of course the health system is another challenge. We could talk about that for years.
Thank you, Magnus. I will repeat the same question, and since Giancarlo joined us, thank you, Giancarlo. And of course, I will leave some time for you to relax and prepare. So go to Marco.
Sorry, I have a problem with my flights. That there are some operation and military operation on the air, and they close the space. That means the U.S. Air Force are making it in this moment. I hope not through war, but I take 2 hours to come here with a tour around Mittel Europe.
Thank you very much. We just started, so you haven't missed anything actually. So we are just commenting the kind of a social model with increasing cost of aging on one side, and on the other side, so trying to find or discussing about the most effective system for funding the pension and health system needs, which are of course already enormous in all member states, and the statistics is even darker, especially regarding the healthcare needs in the future. So Marco, what's your view on this?
Thank you very much, Klemen. I would also like to thank everyone for joining us here, and to thank Klemen and his team for organizing this event. And I fully agree. Our Brussels meetings really resemble a therapy group, because we, being in our countries and talking to the line ministries, we all feel somehow alone, and we all face similar challenges, so to say. So whenever we have discussions with our line ministries, they're trying to explain why we should spend for certain things, and if we don't agree, they seem to not understand that we understand that this is important, but there is not enough money. So they tend to ask, like, why are you against pensioners? They ask me, what do you have against working people? What do you have against roads? What do you have against railways? I have nothing against railways. I have nothing against roads. I support pensioners. I love everybody. But the thing is that there is not always enough money for covering all these needs. So I tend to turn the story around, and I said, okay, I support pensioners, but tell me, where should I find the money for this? Should we cut wages in the public sector? Should we cut, investments, stop building roads? And then you turn the discussion other way around, but it's really painful, because you feel alone, really. And they, all the colleagues from line ministries, they tend to discuss, they have the same position. They're always observing the finance minister as somebody who does not understand political importance of certain steps. And then when we meet in Brussels, you really feel among colleagues. The situation is challenging, definitely, and you mentioned, Klemen, the fiscal position of many countries and the deficit levels and debt to GDP ratios, which are increasing, and I fully agree that the model that we have had so far was not the most appropriate one. If you have a limit of debt to GDP set at 60%, and if a lot of countries are breaching this limit, then something has to be changed. Observing the limit itself and trying to understand why the limit is set at 60%, whoever you ask, people tell you, okay, this is to ensure the fiscal prudence, and this is to ensure that the country is creditworthy, that you can pay off the debts. And then I tend to ask, okay, what's happening with Japan? They have 250% of GDP, debt to GDP ratio, and the credit rating of Japan is AAA. So this is not the only criterion, right? It depends who is holding the debt. It depends what are you doing with this money, whether you are investing, increasing productivity, increasing growth, etc. Now, talking about growth, after the pandemics that has hardly hit Croatia as well as other countries, we have quickly rebounded. We have, in 2021, the growth rate was more than 13%, in 2022 more than 6%, and now we are expecting data for 2023, it will be around 2.8, something like that. So I can say that we were a bit lucky in this sense. So all the numbers using GDP as denominator were fine. So we constantly decrease the public debt to GDP ratio. We are now at around 60%. About the deficit of the general government, we expect around 0.6 last year. But this year, the deficit will increase. We expect around 2%, something like that. It is evident that during the COVID pandemics, but also during the crisis with rising inflation and energy prices, something had to be done. We, as a government, are trying to promote the market activities, not to limit, not to intervene in the market. But when sudden effects happen, there is really a need for the state to intervene. And now it's the question of how to intervene, right? Everybody was mentioning that the measures should be precise, targeted, etc. So we were focusing on income support measures, really targeting the poor population, people who have low pensions, people who were receiving so-called minimum guaranteed benefits, and this is the lowest decile of the population in Croatia. However, when it comes to the prices of electricity, it was hard to, cap the prices and kept the prices only to the poor ones. We also had some unfortunate events in Croatia, not only events, but the structure of the economy and the administrative capacities to perform some measures. For example, we do not have the registry of households in Croatia. So I wanted to target, for example, the price subsidy to households, but it was not possible to target it according to the member of the household or the income level per member of the household, because we don't know who is living with whom, right? So I started this discussion in Croatia for the first time. Everybody was curious, okay, why is he building this registry? He is going to create a big brother for, Croatian citizens, trying to follow who is living with whom. So a lot of media attention was there, a lot of articles saying that we want to, investigate everything. But the fact is that we wanted to connect the data from, for example, the Ministry of Interior, but you have a building with many flats, everybody seems to be living in the same family, right? So it was hard to do this. I think that really providing support measures which are targeted and intervening when the time comes and when it is necessary helps to increase also the productivity, helps to increase growth, and this is why we were happy in this respect to maintain a stable growth rate. When it comes to a pension system and healthcare system and, looking at the projections up to 2070, for example, we were really trying, and what the accession to the Eurozone and now trying to accede to the OECD, etc., to all these organizations was what we were actually required to do is to amend the statistics, to be completely transparent, to introduce many measures to make the system more effective. And we were really being fair on this. So in terms of the contingent liabilities, we have really limited a set of sources of contingent liabilities. For example, we don't have a set of guarantees that are troubling the budget. We don't have public-private partnership projects. We don't have liabilities of entities that are supported by the central government budget. And then also when it comes to the implicit contingent liabilities, for example, from the long-term care, and this is what comes from the projections of 2070, with the introduction of the second and the third pillar in 2001, 2002, we have really transformed the implicit contingent cost of aging into direct debt. Why is that? Because we had 20% contributions in the first pillar. This is the pay-as-you-go one. And we have decided to deduct 5% from this 20% of contributions, and we put this 5% to the second pillar. It is mandatory. This, of course, created a deficit in the first pillar. So we can say that the assets that are accumulated in the second pillar are actually deficit financed. So if the public debt to GDP ratio is 60%, we have around 20% of GDP assets in the second pillar. It means that we have actually transformed 20% of GDP of implicit contingent liabilities into direct ones. So I really think that saving for the retirement and especially strengthening the third pillar, which is voluntary, where people can save if they want, is a way out of this situation. When it comes to the population aging, I mean, in Croatia, in 1980s, the ratio of workers to pensioners was 4:1. So 4 people working, 1 pensioner. In 90s, it was around 3:1, and it decreased to 1.2:1 nowadays. So it is really significant. Of course, the population aging, some people also leaving the country, especially when we joined the European Union. This was a challenge. The people were really expecting to, for the borders to open and they can actually move freely. Now a lot of people are coming back, returning. I think that you can tackle this issue from 2 perspectives. First one is the demographic one, of course, to increase the number of people living in the country, to try to incentivize people to come back to the country for those who left. And then also from the fiscal position, trying to make the savings more attractive. But of course, talking about the second pillar and the third pillar, everybody is discussing the cost of this reform, the transition cost. They are not only comparing the return on these assets that are accumulated in the second pillar compared to the inflation, but since it is deficit financed, it means that actually it should be, the return should be higher than the borrowing cost that we are facing due to this deficit. So the situation is really challenging, but I think that having in mind the long-term perspective, increasing the incentives or incentivizing people to save in saving accounts, but also giving opportunities to the pension funds to invest domestically and abroad and in projects with higher rate of return would stabilize the system in the long term and would make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Marko. Ladislav, some of the challenges Slovakia is facing is compared to the others even bigger. So how do you cope with all this?
Thank you, Klemen. First of all, thank you for your hospitality here in Ljubljana. I like this place very much. I was the last time here 1 year ago, and a really beautiful place here. You opened the 2 biggest topics in Slovakia and the 2 most difficult to solve topics. Really, in Slovakia, we have the problems with demographic, with the aging of our people, because in the past there were the years where many kids were born, and now is the time, how to say, they are going to pensions and they are not born enough new kids to, how to say, to grow our population in Slovakia. Generally, as also Marko said, first pillar is the strong pillar in Slovakia, and second is deficit finance. Also in Slovakia right now, we decreased contribution by 1% to 4% to second pillar. As I heard, also maybe a colleague from Hungary will explain. And in Poland, they quit the system of the second pillar. is also the performance of the second pillar in Slovakia is not the best, I would say. If you count, for example, if you would get your pension only from the first pillar, you will get maybe of 50 euros more than you get from the both pillars in Slovakia. That are the facts. Of course, the third pillar should be supported by the state. I also feel that this is the way how to solve problems in Slovakia. Nevertheless, we all have face the same problems where to get the money for financing the pensions in Slovakia. I'm from the social democratic government, and we also promised before the October 2023 elections that we give the people, the pensioners, the full 13 pension, and we fulfilled our promises. But generally, is also, of course, is not easy to bring. Then you have to find some other sources for financing the state. Problem. We are focusing right now on the GDP growth in Slovakia. We are using more investments like in comparison with other countries. We would like to use also PPP projects. They are not so. They are not pushing to our increase of our debt. To explain my situation is really as you thought. I was the first time Minister of Finance in 2019. We were the social democratic government. We decreased the deficit. By the last 6 years, we decreased the deficit. We decreased the debt of Slovakia to the level of 48% of GDP. Today, I inherited the debt of 58% in 3.5 years when no rules were working at the European Eurozone level. Last governments increased also the deficit. Last two deficits I inherited are the highest within the European Union countries, is 6.5, 6% and 6.5%. So the situation is not easy. To mention the healthcare system is really challenging. I feel as a Minister of Finance, of course, this is also the topic of Ministry of Healthcare. We need the big reform of healthcare system in Slovakia, really, because you have a system where some doctors are working publicly and privately. What is in their favor they do privately, and what is what is demanding on the capital and finances they are doing publicly, and that is not the system that is sustainable. We need reform, and I am, as a Minister of Finance, I am really focusing on that and pushing on the Ministry of Healthcare to bring some reforms in that way. That is really the biggest challenge right now in Slovakia. So the growth, public investment, and to look for other sources, of course, based on the highest deficit. We are doing the biggest consolidation ever done in Slovakia. Last year, I implemented 18 measures. This is really very, very hard. Also, to keep the social standard of the people. So we try to choose the measures that are not pushing the social standard of the people, but next year will be more and more tougher, and that is our challenge what we face right now.
Thank you, Ladislav. Giancarlo, so what's your position on these topics?
My position, the position of Italy is a position of a country that a serious problem of demography, as all the Western democracy. But the reality is that the rate of birth in Italy is perhaps the worst in Europe. It's not the same in the past, but the reality now is that we aren't able to address the situation in the long term. We could discuss about health, we could discuss about the system of pension. Yes, we made an important reform in 2012 that could ensure in the long term the sustainability of the system, because there is a system in which you receive a pension computed with the contribution. But now we have a transition period in which I have to finance these pensions that we pay today with the fiscal growth. That is the reality. And at the moment we have 16% of GDP in pension. My effort is to keep at this level for the next year. We discuss a lot altogether about the new Stability Pact, the Economic Governance Review. I thank you, Klemen, to focus on these aspects, on these topics, because we discuss a lot about a lot of things there, but without consider, in my opinion, the strategic challenge of Europe, of the whole Europe. In Italy, we attempt we promote some fiscal measure to promote birth. We look to Hungarian example, but is a long-term policy. I don't know if I see the result of that. But I think that the expectation of the people, of the pensioners, are always very, very high. The system of the old pension are so generous that pensioners, at the moment, at the next pension, want to keep this system. And the amount of the population that are already pensioned or want to get the pension early is so important that when we consider election and the constituency, always we have to pay attention, to be careful when we move in some policy in this sector, because we have an immediate effect in the vote and in the polls. That means that the Italian policy is to promote the right birth, to keep the level of expenses at this level, with a postponement of the average age for the pension, not increases a social security cost. That means that we have a mandatory rate of 40% between employee and employers that every month pay for that is so high. We have to reduce this. We made this effort this year to address the inflationary pressure, the reduction of purchasing power of the salary for the low and medium incomer. But clearly, it is impossible in long term to be consistent with this sort of policies, not affordable for our budget. We promote, with the tax incentive, private sector, the second pillar for the pension. But in reality, I think the mindset, general mindset, is that Italian people continue that the state could accomplish this role in the future. Yes, we need a cultural change or shift in this direction. About health, this is in my opinion, a great problem, because obviously, in part, is related with the aging of the population. That if you have aged population, the cost of health increase. But the standard of the offer of health service to increase in the desire of the population now whole call for the best solution, the best surgery, the best hospital. That means that all the system have some problems to answer to this sort of request of the people. Because we have a system in which every region manages the health system. And in some regions, especially in the south, the regions are not able to give a standard of the quality of the service that create a situation of migration, internal migration, that the people move from the south to the north to receive a sort of assistance. And this is create a very complicated situation in which every region have to address the situation. Have some resources, some fiscal resources that they collect, but the states have to make the additional effort to give the gap between the resources of the region and obviously the needs, the financial needs for the. I think that is another problem. I don't know if artificial intelligence could help us. I listen, I read that artificial intelligence could perhaps give some help, some solution. But for sure, this is another great problem for the budget, because this year in the state budget we have an expenses of 6.5% of total of expenditure for health. We keep this level of expenses, but it's not easy to explain, because I think that more than a pension, there are political pressure to increase expenses for health. And you know that we have some financial problems, some financial constraints for our budget. I think that we have to consider a very different system of answer for health needs of the population. I think that the old system that was built in the 70s is not at the moment efficient and couldn't give a efficient and not solely efficient, only efficient address to this situation. I think that in Europe we have to start to consider this financial aspect, because if we listened in the last time discussion, we shared a discussion with the social minister that discuss about that. But at the end, we have to pay for everything. We focus a lot, we pay a lot of attention about the green transition, digital transition, so. But at the end, I think the first driver of the vote of our people is actually health and pension. And we are politicians that call for the vote, perhaps in Croatia in next month. But this is the most important topic. And thanks you, Klemen, to take here on this table this discussion, because I think that in my time, during these 2 years in Europe, we discussed very pure and poor discussion about this, that are the most important challenges for everybody.
Thank you so much, Giancarlo. We all know that pensionists are super important part of the voting body, and so we have to balance in this democracy we have. But I'll get back to this issue you raised on the second round. I know you managed to do some quite difficult steps regarding the pension system on one side, and then, like in many countries, where we, I think, unjustifiably combine social component into the pension system. That's also the case we have, and with this debate we have in our government all the time. So one is the pension system, and then is a kind of a social contributions, which in the past became a big part of the pension system, which I don't think is the way to go. I'm not talking about that the social contributions, and of course we should take care of the most vulnerable, which are also part of the retired people, but I think it's just the two systems we were combining or are combining too much. So, Tibor, what's your view on all this?
Thank you, Klemen, first of all, for the invitation to this beautiful city and also managing this lovely weather. In terms of the Hungarian model, I have to first a little bit emphasize the difference of the taxation system in Hungary. As in your introduction, you mentioned that the total taxation burden on the Slovenian economy, it's like 44%, which is lower than the EU average. In Hungary, it's basically significantly lower. It's only 35%. So how can we still survive with this relatively, or not relatively, still very low taxation level? So basically, this government 14 years ago decided to introduce a very low income-based tax system and the most transparent and flat tax-based system. So it means that the corporate income tax in the country is only flat 9%. The personal income tax at the same time is also flat, it's 15%, 1.5. So this very low tax level resulted in two very positive effects. One, from the investment side, corporates were very much incentivized to invest into the country, not only the domestic companies, but also foreign companies to come to Hungary. And of course, that boosted the revenues. As a result of that, let's say just an example on the FDI level, in 2022, the FDI to Hungary was 6.5 billion euro. That was a record level. And that record was even doubled last year. So the FDI reached 13 billion euros last year. But this not only affected positively the investment side, but also the employment side. Hungary was famous from a taxation point of view for the black economy, but by introducing these low taxes, what we see that the tax income started to increase significantly, and also that the activity rate of the population increased dramatically. So before introducing this system, the number of employees were 3.7 million. By now, it's exceeding 4.7 million. So this tax system added 1 million additional taxpayer to the system. So this resulted in a very favorable budget situation for many years. The many years means that especially until the COVID, because since the COVID and since the war has started, this budget situation became very tense and challenging. But up until the COVID period, we could sustain this model, and it was a very successful model. By reducing the tax, we could reduce also the total debt of the country from 85% to the 70% level. Now it's much more difficult, and of course the the lower taxation means a little bit less service on the healthcare and the pension side. So if we are talking about the healthcare system in Hungary, what we can see that is the government is spending approximately 7.5% of the total GDP to the healthcare, which is lower than the EU average. But that is pushing that there is a state-owned healthcare system which is provided for every citizen, but the level of state healthcare system, of course, is not so high. Basically, the waiting lists are relatively long, and the service is not always the best. So what we are doing is that the population with their higher income, as the personal income tax is only 15%, so people have higher available income, they are more and more going towards the private healthcare system. That is going to provide a relief to the Hungarian budget, but unfortunately that's not the case in the pension system, where we are a little bit more generous what we could have afford. So we are spending approximately 9 to 10% of the GDP for the healthcare, and we have recently introduced a 13 months pension as well in order to improve the pensioner situation. But the system for the time being is sustainable. But what we can see, as you mentioned, the biggest challenge is the aging society. So the other aspect that we are trying to focusing on is how can we change this situation? Because demography is, we believe it's a #1 issue within Europe. So Hungary is going to take the EU presidency as from July. And one of the most important topics that we would like to be on the agenda is the demography. We believe that so far Europe was not paying enough attention to this critical issue, and the long-term sustainability of the pension and the healthcare system is very much depending on the demography issue. So hopefully we are trying to discuss it in depth during the Hungarian EU presidency in the second half of this year. But just a final thought on that which is also related to the Hungarian tax system. At the same time as we were trying and reducing the taxes as much as possible, we are also trying to implement an incentive for the families from a taxation point of view. What we see in Hungary and also in Europe, that in most of the taxation systems are built in a way that it's favorable for the individuals and not for the families. So it's very much good for if you are single, and if you don't have a family, then you can have a much more available spending and available money. But that's motivating people to remain single, and instead of establishing family and having big families to solve the demographic issues. So what we have started to do is that to change this taxation system and giving higher benefits and higher tax benefits for the families, and especially for the mothers. So we have introduced that mothers with 4 children, they don't have to pay personal income tax at all for their lifetime, never. So it's the personal income tax is 0. And also we would like to reduce this number because 4 children is a little bit ambitious nowadays. So our plan is to reduce it to 3 children in the upcoming period. Of course, the deficit situation is a bit challenging to reach that, but that's the objective, that also from a taxation point of view, motivate families and people to focus on families instead of the single life.
Thank you. Based on what you said in the first round, I think we could have 2 hours discussions with each of you on the measures, which were introduced and which you are thinking of. But anyway, if you go now more specific about certain steps your governments did regarding social fairness and competitiveness. Marko, last year you have included several new revenue measures for 2024 that are not directly related to the energy price development. So these include broadening of the scope for tax exemption for personal income taxes and pension contributions that negatively affect revenue. On the other hand, you have also increased the tax rate for capital and property income that is positive concerning the revenue. So can you tell us a little bit more about this combination of measures?
Sure. Thank you, Klemen. I'll just reflect briefly on what some of the colleagues were discussing and saying. I just learned that a lot of you are considering or have already introduced the 13th pension. Also, the discussion among us and the peer pressure that is present here is putting a lot of burden on our back, because when we go back to our countries, then the voters are putting pressure on us, saying, okay, look at what the Hungary is doing, look at what the Slovenia is doing. Everybody has the 13th pension. Why are you against pensioners again? So I think that we should have more conferences or more discussions like this before we make certain decisions, to be strong and then to discuss, even if it is needed in all countries. We can invite several ministries to explain to the general public why certain measures are not good in terms of the spending. I fully agree that demography is crucial in this respect. Also, definitely adding to the growth rate and adding to the fiscal stability if it is maintained correctly. And in this sense, we are also considering several measures in Croatia. However, when I talk to my colleagues who are proposing these measures, in Croatia we have another challenge. It is not that the number of children being born is so low, but the fact that people are leaving the country. They are going to Germany, they are going to Austria. So the response to this is not to give incentives to have more children, because if they have a free education, free schooling, free healthcare, free under quotation marks, right? It's being paid by the taxpayers' money. And then if we leave these people to go abroad, then it's just creating additional burden, additional cost. So we are trying to explain that we should first make the economy boom and create better working places with higher salaries, more productive, etc. And then it really makes sense to have more children. Regarding the question that you asked about the measures that we have taken, of course, during these times it was challenging also explaining to the general public back home that the deficit level has to be low. We wanted to maintain the levels of the Maastricht criteria, but a lot of countries were exceeding these limits, not in terms of the deficit, but also in terms of the debt to GDP ratio. So it was hard to say if people understand that the revenues are increasing, that the budget is maintaining this in good respect, that we have to save and that we should not increase expenditures, because people had this feeling that since the inflation is there, we are still coping with the rate of inflation. It is brought down to 4.1, 4.2% in Croatia, but I think in November 2022, it peaked at around 13.5%. So it was quite significant. And people were telling, okay, the inflation is filling the budget because we have the VAT rate, which is just below the Hungarian one. In Hungary, you have 27, we have 25 in Croatia. It is quite significant. people were telling, okay, you are filling in the budget and you're not giving anything in return. They wanted to increase the deficit to more than 3%. So it was really challenging combining this and thinking of measures that would satisfy the population in general. I fully agree that the political context here has to be taken into account. Although I come from university and I tend to be more technician than a politician, but I like the paper that was presented at the ECOFIN, and you were also discussing about this, Klemen. You actually found it and presented these conclusions of the paper, saying that if we are fiscally stringent in these difficult times, it increases actually the popularity of those far left or far right radical, I would say, fractions. And at this crossroads that we are all facing right now, it is crucial to maintain the social cohesion, to avoid a social fracture that is being present in some countries in terms of the protests and social unrest. I think at this point it is really important to have this in mind. So we also decided to increase the expenditures this year. So we are planning to have higher deficit compared to the GDP when it comes to the general government. And we have taken several steps. So we understood that something has to be done in order to make the situation for citizens more affordable. So in the personal income tax system, we have these exemptions. Exemption, this is the amount of money that is not included in the tax base, right? A lot of people wanted to increase these personal exemptions. If we increase these exemptions, this will mean that we are helping the people who are paying the taxes. However, in Croatia, due to a level of these personal exemptions, which is quite significant, around 50% of taxpayers are not obliged to pay the personal income tax. So their tax base is below the level of exemptions. So if we have increased the exemptions, we would just increase the number of people not paying taxes, and we would not help the poor ones who are not paying the taxes anyway. This is why we have actually decided to go the other way around. We were thinking about the tax rates. Since the personal income tax in Croatia is shared between local government and regional government, so it is not a central government revenue at all, we decided to provide more autonomy to the local government level. So we have actually set these limits, trying to cap the maximum rate, but we have allowed for a decrease in the personal income taxation for local government units, and a lot of local government units, since they were also thinking politically, were decreasing the rate of taxation. And the second part that we wanted to, since this was obviously the foregone revenue for local government units, we also had to give our stake. So we decided to provide exemptions, and this is the new creative idea that we came to, provide exemptions for paying the pension contributions. This adds additional burden to the pensions system. It is already financed around 40% from the budget, actually from the VAT, right? So around 60% is covered from the pension contributions. With these exemptions, we have actually succeeded in helping those who were not paying the personal income tax. And we set these exemptions up to gross salary up to 1,300 euros. So people who are below these levels get some sort of exemptions for paying the social contributions. This added additional burden to the central government budget. So the rate that we are financing from the budget is not 39%, but 42%, for example, of the total pension expenditures. But in turn, we actually increase the purchasing power of these citizens. And since we are having the value-added tax rate of 25%, they are giving back to a certain extent, or to a larger extent, this to the economy, to the consumption, and actually increasing in turn also the revenue of the central government. We understand that the VAT rate in Croatia is high compared to other countries. However, when it comes to the personal income taxation and corporate income taxes, we are maintaining the rates as low as possible. We have also provided additional autonomy to local government units in terms of, and I know this is also the topic which is quite important in Slovenia as well, because we are following the situation, and this is the property taxation. We don't have a property tax in Croatia, the real recurrent property tax. However, we have this tax on vacation houses. It is not based on the value of the house, of the property, but is based on the surface, on the square meters. So before the changes taking effect from 1st of January, local government units were able to introduce this tax up to 2 euros per square meter. I have increased this level up to 5 euros per square meter. So giving the opportunity to local government units to decrease the personal income tax, the tax on labor, and simultaneously increase the tax on capital, on properties, they have decided to really decrease the taxation of labor, and they have a lot of units, I would say, from 150 units that were having this tax on vacation houses, 52 units have introduced the level of taxation to 5 euros per square meter, so to the maximum amount. So we have actually achieved a shift in the tax burden from labor to properties without introducing the property taxations that we will have to consider in the future what to do really with this tax, because it is called the tax on vacation houses, but it is actually imposed on any property or part of the property which is being used part-time, so to say. So it really holds also for the vacant apartments in the center of Split, because if nobody is living there and if it is not a long-term rental, then it's actually being treated as a tax base for this tax. So we'll have to reconsider and definitely shift the burden of the tax from labor more intensively to other sources or sources of the economic power, right?
Thank you, Marco. Giancarlo, you have done some measures on the revenue side as well. To be more precise, cuts to social security contributions for those on low and medium incomes. And as I understand, this is kind of a first step of the general tax reform. My question will be on the social security contributions. Your social security contributions rate on employee is lower compared to the rate in our country. How do you finance the rights? Do you place a greater emphasis on private insurance?
First of all, I would underline that Italy have a huge burden of public debt that came from the past, that probably some of your countries came toward the welfare system later than us. That means that you start in more favorable situation than Italy. Then when you think that the Italian public budget, you always have to consider the burden on interest that I have to pay every year. That means that if I haven't 60 or 70% of GDP, debt of GDP, probably I have 40 billions to spend for social insurance, birth, reduction of taxation, and so. Okay, I think that our policy is to address in some way the reduction of purchasing power of households and low incomes. That with a sort of inflation that we know in the last year, and any sort of renew of the contracts of the workers, because that started this year, this process, we have to make something. And we decided to have a temporary reduction of social contribution for these employers. Financed by the public balance, okay? But we decided to reduce the tax burden for the workers on the labor and reduce, for example, indexation of the pension. Few people and perhaps a European institution don't consider this sort of bold policy that we have taken. The indexation for the pension that overcome 2,000 euro every month has been sterilized in reality. That means a reduction of real pension. We have reformed the so-called reddito di cittadinanza, citizenship income, okay? That means that we put money for people that works and reduce some form of assistance that is clearly directed to promote inefficiency in the labor market. That means that we have a challenge for the future because it is a temporary measure. And in 2025 and 2026, we have to implement the old system of the new reform of taxation. But the principle of this reform is to promote labor and investment. That means that we have to reduce the burden, tax burden for people that works and reduce some form of social insurance that in the last year has been decided that clearly don't create an incentive to participate in the labor market. Social contribution. I think that we have to consider exactly the situation, the picture of this is around 40% because we have to consider the mandatory contribution of the employee around 9% and the employers that is very, very high. And there are another form of a social system that I don't know perhaps Magnus could know that this is the trattamento fino al reporto is a sort of severance pay that is compulsory, precautionary saving that are realized by the employers. And that is paid at the end of the career. When the people left a company, the company have to pay an amount that is calculated around a month every year. That means that 20 years, 20 months of salary are to be paid at the end. These are compulsory. And that means that when you catch the pension, you have the pension, but a sum lump at the end of your career that is paid by the private sector. In the public sector, sentence of constitutional court call for a similar policy for the public employees. That means a problem for us. We pay with a sort of mortgage system to them. This is a public social security system. We give incentives, tax incentives for private instruments. They aren't so developed. In our expectation, the result could be better, but the reality is that people prefer to spend money, not to save it. And perhaps one of the most important asset of Italian system is the level of private debt, because you, European Commission, always remind us about the public Italian debt. But the level of the private debt of the families in Italy is very, very reduced, very, very low. And we have to work about this asset, the saving of the Italians, that is using every year. and manage a situation in which we need that these savings move in direction of our public bonds, because I have to finance every 2 weeks my debt with savings that came from Italian household and from abroad, and to mobilize these savings in the private sector to promote investment. We discussed with Mario Draghi last time in Ghent about that. But this is another topics for discussion, perhaps in the next meetings. The savings in Europe. How we could mobilize in the right direction, in the productive direction. Because if we would to promote growth in Europe, we have to promote productive investment. Public, but I prefer to consider private. Okay, this is the situation. It's not easy to manage the Italian public budget because the legacy of the past is very, very serious. We are able to do, obviously, and hopefully the reduction of interest rates could help us a little.
Tibor, from July last year, income from interest is also subject to social security contribution and except interest from real estate investment funds. Like other capital income, there is no cap on social security contribution for interest. First, I would like to know if you have noticed a possible decline in the capital market, and with this introduction of the social security contribution on this income. And secondly, I would like to know what was the main reason that interest payment is not part of the social contribution cap.
Yes, first of all, just a little background that this measure is only a temporary measure in Hungary. From a legislation point of view, since the pandemic and because of the war, we call this period an emergency period, and also we are following emergency legislation. And the main driver behind this measure was that what we have seen is that because of the war especially, and also due to the energy crisis, the inflation in Hungary was very high. It was at the beginning of last year, it was exceeding 25% at the beginning of the year. That, of course, pushed very high the base rate of the National Bank of Hungary. And that also resulted in a situation that the banking sector basically stopped lending. What they have done is that they put the deposits of the private individuals and the corporate sector's private individuals, they just put it into the National Bank of Hungary, and they earned a significant interest rate on that. That resulted in that last year, the banking sector profitability reached more than 1,500 billion Hungarian forint, which is, just to put it into perspective, it's approximately 4 billion euro. That was the profitability of the banking sector in Hungary, relatively small country, huge profit. What the government tried to do is that a little bit push individuals from placing savings into the banking sector and a little bit achieve the shift of placing these deposits into the government bonds. Because the total debt of Hungary, approximately now it's 73%, relatively close to the Maastricht criteria, but still a long way to go. But I think within the room, we are the only country with its own currency. That is having some advantages, but also some disadvantages. Especially the vulnerability of the single currency without the backing of the European Central Bank is a little bit, it's a bigger challenge. So what we have decided from a public debt financing point of view is that we are setting benchmarks. And I just mentioned two benchmarks for the public debt. One is that among the total debt, the foreign currency part should not exceed 30%, because we don't want to risk too much the foreign currency exchange fluctuation. So we kept it at 30%. That has been reduced from 60 to 30. That was a great achievement. And the other one is that we would like to increase the financing of the households into the total debt. So what we have achieved is that the participation of the households financing in the total debt used to be 5%. Now that went up to 25%. And that's also a benchmark. We don't want to increase that level, but I think that 25% share of the households and the consumers of the total debt financing, it's a quite significant part compared to the European Union member states. So we have invented a very attractive government bonds for the households. Most notably, the most popular was, of course, the inflation-linked bond, which was paying a premium above the inflation itself. But going back to the question, what we have experienced last year, that despite this measure introduced, we have seen a phenomena that not only the government bonds investments increased, but also the banking-related deposits and investment funds-related investments increased. Just because the high inflation, the society switched from a consumption-based mode into a saving mode. So the savings of the households increased incredibly, and they were investing not only to the government bonds, but also to the other investment opportunities which were offered by the banks. So we haven't experienced any fallback in terms of volume from the households into these investments. And the second question was that why we haven't introduced a cap on that, because I'm going back to my original statement that we would like to keep the tax system as transparent and simple as possible. So if there is a cap which should be calculated on an individual basis, that would make the system complicated. So what we have introduced instead of that is that the social contribution on the interest has to be paid by the bank, not by the individual, and the bank has to pay it not on an individual basis, but on a collective basis. So they are calculating the total amount of deposit, and they are paying in one lump sum the total social contribution to the state without a cap. But I think that's the most simple way of paying this tax. And the good news is that it's easy to manage, and also it's a good news that it hasn't caused any fallback in terms of investments from the households.
Thank you. Let's turn to the competitiveness now, the topic we haven't addressed yet. Magnus, what are the main measures around green transition? As I'm aware, you have introduced the taxation of CO2 and recently ramped up public green investment. How do you plan to finance the green transition? And can you please tell us a little bit more about Austria's plans to stay competitive?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a couple of sentences, because it has to do, of course, also with competitiveness, tax reductions and tax reforms, because you all mentioned that in a way. And because you said, Tibor, having a tax system which is as easy as possible, that would be quite something. Ours is not that easy, unfortunately. Ours is not as simple. It's quite complicated. But we had some very big tax reforms in the last 2 years, I would say. One was the eco-social tax reform, which has to do with financing the green transition as well, implementing CO2 taxes as well, but on the other hand, having some subsidies as well for the people and households altogether and that segment. But the second tax reform, which is probably the bigger one altogether, was a reform of the bracket, the tax bracket creep. That is quite something. We have that's a relief for people who pay taxes in Austria for about 3.7 billion alone for 2024. 3.7, which is for Austrian comparison, is quite something. So that was a huge reform, a new income tax code actually, which we had to implement, coming together with that, which helped us also, and you all mentioned that, which helped us to have a very high purchasing power compared to other European countries. We have the second highest purchasing power in Europe after Luxembourg. Okay, Luxembourg is different. Luxembourg is quite different. But coming back to the green transition, because that is something we had to, or we wanted to focus on in the last months also, because there's always the question, in my opinion, how can we reach the goals? How can we reach the climate goals? We've got quite ambitious climate goals in Europe, 2050 being climate neutral, and in Austria even 10 years earlier than that, 2040. How can we reach that goals and still remain competitive on the other side? That's a sort of difficult question. I think, I mean, of course, for all of us, probably climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our generation altogether. So we must be, in my opinion, very efficient, because you have to pay it with taxpayers' money. So be as efficient as possible, and that made us sort of think about creating a climate hub within the Ministry of Finance, where we bring together all the knowledge we have in the Ministry of Finance, and then try to use the taxpayers' money as effective and efficient as possible. Because I think climate policy and environmental policy have to go hand in hand with fiscal policy and economic policy altogether. Because if it's not, and budgetary policy, of course, because if one measure doesn't exist in the budget, it doesn't take place, and it's quite easy. And that's why I always wonder why especially our Minister of Environmental Affairs and Climate Change is a bit nervous when I'm talking about climate change and measures against it. But that's pretty obvious, because, as I said, if it's not in the budget, it doesn't take place. And I think we have to focus on, well, in general, 3 things. That's the investments, of course. We need public money, yes, but we also need private money. Otherwise, it won't be possible to finance the transformation altogether. And the climate hub, and also a new system which we implemented, a sort of green budgeting system, helps us to use these taxpayers' money as effective as possible, and to look at all the taxpayers' money in that way that we think about what is the effect of the exact euro we take to fight against the climate change. That's a bit difficult to explain to the public, probably, but it's very effective on the second view. And this budgeting process, green budgeting process, is actually here to analyze the effects of each euro. And as I said before, I think the public can't finance the whole transition by itself, so we need to mobilize private capital, and that's what we were talking before, and talking about in Europe, the capital market union. I think that's one of the key elements to finance also the transition at the end of the day. And I think we should think more into the future. We have to think different things till the very end, which we don't do a lot or not enough on a European level. What do I mean with that? I think there is a link, for instance, between the taxonomy on the one hand, but also the critical raw material act on the other hand. So bringing those things together, I think, is pretty obvious on the one hand, but very critical on the other hand. And what we did, because you mentioned that before, we emitted green bonds, really green bonds, Austrian green bonds. I mention it because we don't have any nuclear power in Austria. So really green nuclear power for Austrians is not green. That's why I mention it. And we emitted green bonds, and they were quite successful, I would say. They were 7 times oversubscribed at the beginning, which is quite a lot actually, and which also shows that the market is actually calling for possibilities like green bonds, at least in Austria. And that was quite a success story, I would say.
I agree. We have the similar conclusion from our issuance of green bonds. The problem today is there is not enough green projects. So so we recently issued the green bond and intend to do another one. But basically, the problem is to find the proper projects, and even in Slovenia by now we're still. I mean, today the definition of green investments. I mean, I'm talking about the last issuance of green bonds and the new one. It will be done by Austrian standards.
Okay. I mean, we are using also public transport systems, investing in public transport systems, in taking that into the green bonds as well. So there are a lot of projects in there.
Yeah. Ladislav, to another interesting point, inclusive and sustainable growth. As I understand, you have some structural challenges on housing, as we have in Slovenia. Do you plan to address this with tax policy, or you see some additional policies like a specific housing policy? And like I said, we also face certain challenges, if I may say, also then related to the long-term or short-term leases. So in this context, we are, of course, dealing with the preparation of appropriate tax measures. What's your view on that?
I would like to also speak a little more general, then I come to your question about housing. We speak about competitiveness. Also, Magnus said, to explain a little bit the situation in Slovakia. We are, maybe nobody knows, but Slovakia is the biggest producer of cars per capita in the world. We have 5 big companies in Slovakia. There is Volkswagen, Kia, there is Peugeot, Renault. Then we have Land Rover, and we have a last investment of Volvo in the eastern part of Slovakia. Slovakia is a really energy demanding country. It's industrial, is much industrialized and very open economy. We are exporting almost 85% of all production we produce in Slovakia, and even through your port Koper is one of the biggest port that is exporting our cars into the world. And this is the situation. And we all speak today about how to finance our social programs, how to finance our pension, how to finance our healthcare. And there's what Magnus said, we can increase the taxes. That is not not the way today. The labor taxes in Slovakia are one of the highest. There is 19% of labor tax in Slovakia. Then we have no space. But What we can do is to produce more, to be more effective, to be more productive. But problem is, of course, our competitiveness, what we are talking today. And we are speaking about competitiveness in whole Europe, because problematic is energy. There are energy prices in Europe, and Slovakia, as energy demanding country, is really suffering by that. If we don't have cheap energies, then we will not be competitive. We cannot produce our production cheaply and to sell it. And what is the situation in Europe right now? We are losing the companies. They are moving to US, they are moving to China, and that's really that is the main question that we have to solve. To this housing problem in Slovakia is really very specific situation. In Slovakia, almost 90% of all houses and flats are owned by the people. They are not lease or tenant. They are not tenants. That means that we are depending very much on the mortgage rates and so on, and people are used to buy because Slovakia is a small country. The people are not moving a lot to find a job in Slovakia. Secondly, what happened in Slovakia last years? We are lack of skilled employees for our industry. Unemployment rate in Slovakia is at the lowest level historically, at the 5-6%. It's really very low. And what is doing our government? We are really trying to attract to the people from abroad. We are calling it like legal migration, and we are trying to attract the people from the third countries like India, Vietnam, and to get the skilled workers for our automotive industry. What is the challenge of housing in Slovakia? We don't have the houses for these employees we need. Because, for example, Volvo is building the new factory, but they have no houses and flats for the workers. That's the problem. We try now, we are intensivize what we do. We would like to attract the private investment. Also, there are some Austrian companies like Vienna Insurance Group interested to invest in Slovakian housing business. And what we did, we decreased the value-added tax from general value-added tax in Slovakia is 20%. We decreased to 5% that we attract some investors to invest in the housing into Slovakia. That are the concrete steps we do in this way. That's in terms of taxes. We have no space to increase the labor taxes. We have still space in value-added tax. We have 20% of value-added tax, as I heard Marko told. You have 25, I think, and 27 in Hungary. But of course, the problem is that living standard in Slovakia is really very low, one of the lowest within the European Union. Even we have the same problem as Giancarlo said, with the highest deficit, we have to finance it through the financial market. So our surcharges on our bonds are still one of the highest within the Eurozone. We need to show up the financial markets the strong consolidation. I did the consolidation, unprecedented consolidation in 2023. I will follow up with our new rules, fiscal rules. We agreed at the ECOFIN level, but for Slovakia, this means 1% of GDP each year is really one of the highest from all the countries. That are the challenges that is facing the government in Slovakia.
I know my colleagues are showing me that we should stop and give the opportunity to the public. But my last question to anybody who feels comfortable to talk about it won't be about the competitiveness. Also, only this subject is, subject we should talk more. I mean, I remember our last February ECOFIN meeting in Ghent, and remember our colleague Christian saying, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and he said, United States are talking about innovation, how to attract the knowledge in this area, while EU is pioneer in regulating it. I don't want to simplify, but that's we are all aware of about the regulation, about all the European laws we have to introduce our legislation. It's mostly about the regulation. So I hope that we will spend more time on this on the future meetings in Brussels and Luxembourg. But like I said, my last question, since most of you mentioned it at the beginning, was so how to find the balance about the main subject of today's conference is of course the all the needs we have to cover, and on the other hand, limited sources. One of the projects which I'm with my colleagues trying to introduce through the Ministry of Finance, but basically it's much broader, is something which has a working title, introducing of controlling system into the public sector. I'm coming from private sector, so I was used to very different, what I say, controlling in a private sector compared to the public sector. And of course, I guess my colleagues, ministers, are not too happy about the ideas which we have about this. But some of you mentioned, the way to go is, of course, use taxpayers' money as effective as possible. Does any of you have a thought on this and what to do, how to? I mean, don't want to end this meeting with two political statements. We all agree on this, but what do you think in kind of more realistic terms? What's the proper way to go? I'm looking at you because you mentioned it first. I mean,
be as efficient as possible. But as you mentioned correctly, and that is the truth, what you said, what Christian said in Ghent as well, that we are regulating too much in Europe and in Austria. I don't know what happens in your countries, but we are regulating almost everything in Austria. And there's always everyone talks about having less bureaucracy and less regulation, but nobody keeps that up, and nobody in the whole sort of society keeps that up. And everyone, if there's one single problem, everyone is calling for new regulation. So we are not very trustworthy in that respect. And what is the difference between Europe and the rest of the world or other regions? We won't have, and we will never have the lowest energy costs, and we will never have the most parts of raw materials, for instance. What we can have is the brightest minds. I think we should focus on that. And we can also reduce, and that's the problem of the European Union altogether, we can reduce bureaucracy and regulation. These are the chances we should see on a European level. So we should definitely focus on that. I just just talked to my colleagues in the Ministry of Finance, and I said, to be trustworthy again, as politicians also, we should look at the 5 most stupid regulations we have in the Ministry of Finance, and we should just abolish them. And that's one possibility to get back the sort of trustworthy position in the public.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Last time in Ghent, when we discussed about competitiveness, I say that yes, it's a problem for money, but it's not only a problem for money. I think that the problem for Italy is that the true risk that the spirit of entrepreneurship could disappear. The key of the growth and the competitiveness is the spirit of entrepreneurship. We could mobilize a lot of money, but if all the high skills young, move to US. All the decisions move to US. Where the growth is promoted? There. And I think that we have to work for this. And regulation. It's clear that regulation and bureaucracy is a sort of cage for the spirit of entrepreneurship. You have to reduce this cage. We have to reduce the bureaucracy and regulation to promote the spirit of entrepreneurship. This is the key and true driver of the growth of the United States, in my opinion.
Thank you all. One thing is theory, something else is practice. My colleagues at one of the departments, I won't tell which, just told me a few days ago that they have to introduce 60 new directives into our system in the next half a year. That's one of the directors of the Ministry of Finance. Just okay. So thank you all, but as I said, we're not finished. So Tina, I think now it's your turn. Just whatever you want, whoever you want.
Ja, zdaj so na vrsti vaša vprašanja, tako da prosimo samo, da se prijavite k besedi in se seveda predstavite, ko jih boste zastavljali. Čas za novinarska vprašanja bo pa po konferenci, tako kot smo tudi napovedali. Tako da kar dvignite roke in vprašate. Gospod Vasle, a lahko?
So, good afternoon, and first of all, thank you very much for interesting debate and a lot of insight what's going on in the neighboring countries, in the countries of the region. Now, for my question, you mentioned several important topics, several important projects like competitiveness, pension systems, housing systems, and also a green transition. And of course, this project will need big, if not huge, financing in the future. And this will be a significant challenge. But for the solution, there is one solution which is relatively obvious, and this is an advancement with Capital Markets Union. But it's obvious that the progress in this field is very slow. So my question is, why is it so slow, and is it realistic to expect some fastening of the whole process in the next years? Thank you.
Maybe I start, but open to, because we're all sitting together on the same table in Brussels talking about the Capital Market Union. And I think that's one of the most focused topics we have at the moment, I would say, in the next weeks to come also. I think the head of the Eurogroup, Pascal Donohoe, our Irish colleague, is very keen on pushing forward the Capital Market Union. And what is behind that? We need capital for these investments you mentioned, for the green transition, for everything, and we need capital. We need money for the small and medium-sized enterprises. The big ones don't have that problem that much, so we need it for the small and medium-sized enterprises to get risk capital, for instance, and that's what we are talking about. It's going a bit. You mentioned Christian and also Bruno, our French colleague, and they're not on the same path. And if France and Germany is not on the same path, it's taking a bit longer, I would say, to be honest. But I'm very confident that we find a sort of compromise solution before the European elections, hopefully, because after that it will be over anyway for a couple of months. Wants to.
But just, I mean, since it's at least for me as a Minister of Finance, one of the probably three most important topics. I'm talking about Slovenia. I mean, of course, there are many challenges. One of those is also that the capital markets are very different differently developed in Europe. So we are in very different stages, and of course, we have to catch up a lot. So, and then another thing is that, of course, not all the countries see the same, see the development of the capital market as important as we are. So basically that's why, and then of course finding a compromise among 27 countries, it's a challenge. So I agree with you. The recent statement is a big success, but of course just the capital market union will not help us per se. Of course we have to do at home a lot, and so honestly I'm not relying that much at this stage on the union, but like I said, a lot of homework to do.
And it's again a lot about regulation. Some countries want to have more regulation. Some countries say we've got enough regulation already. So that at the end of the day, it's a compromise. Yeah, it's always difficult. But you're perfectly right. I think. Well, not all countries are on the same level. Austria, for instance, is not very good when it comes to the capital market. So we have to catch up in there.
Ima kdo morda še vprašanje za naše? Izvolite.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Adrian Farlam, the Ambassador of Ireland. Thanks so much for organising this event. Look, I don't want to keep people from their lunch, so just a very quick question. Just with the new commission coming in the autumn or after the summer, what would be on your personal wish list, on your priority list that you'd like the new commission to focus on in all areas, for example, the areas you cover, including tax reform? Thanks so much.
Competitiveness. That should be the focus, in my opinion. It was the Green Deal last time, and I think this time it should be competitiveness, because that's what we are missing.
Just let me add one thought to that, because Hungary is going to become the first presidency within the European Union for the new Commission. So our job is to set the agenda for the first period of the new Commission, and because there's going to be a legislative interim period from the summer until the new Commission is setting up. We are trying to focus within the European Union to the strategic issues, and instead of being very much focused on the legislation, we would like to discuss those very important topics which are critical to the competitiveness of Europe. And these topics, according to our plan, should be, as I mentioned, demography. The other one is the competitiveness of Europe. The third one is EU enlargement. And the fourth one is green transition. And the fifth one is defense spending.
Maybe I would like to add the topic with competitiveness. I feel for Slovakia is the most important topic, to competitiveness. But we are speaking about regulation. One of the measures we took last year was to decrease our cost by 5% for each ministry in the government. It's really hard. You cannot imagine how really other ministers were looking at me when I was asking to reduce the costs. But if we speak about bureaucracy and regulations about these red tapes, we are so much speaking at the ECOFIN. Always I was thinking how to reduce the staff at the ministry, and if you have more regulation, you need more people for that. That's the way how to save the money, and more and more and more and more. And that is increasing our costs. And if you imagine some entrepreneur that has maybe 5 productive people and he needs 10 unproductive people for regulations, that is really against the competitiveness of all the Europe. That is what we need to solve, I think.
Še kakšno vprašanje? Mislim, da smo vse povedali. Minister, zadnja beseda pa seveda vaša.
Okay, so thank you so much. Again, thank you for coming to Ljubljana. I think we know each other quite well. We meet every month for 2 days, and we always speak very openly. Probably more open than I speak with some of my colleagues in my government. And what I'm really happy about is that about the subject which started to came on the agenda of ECOFINs in the last half a year. So basically, it's not just the usual boring stuff, if you want, but it's like I said, the competitiveness, the regulation, and of course, we will all agree we need less regulation, but it's sorry, but hell of a job, and it's not enough that we just agree that not just United States, but also the rest of the world, especially the Asia, they were not talking that much, but doing the right things, So and anyhow, we will have to adopt at the end of the day. So looking forward to our future discussions, and hope that we will organize a few more discussions like this one. So thank you.
Najlepša hvala. Tisti, ki imate čas, pa se seveda nam lahko pridružite na majhni pogostitvi, tam, kjer smo vas pozdravili s kavo. Hvala lepa.